Hello and welcome back. We've made it through our first week of our 13-week course here concerning world history, history 122 to the modern era. Today we're going to be looking at the Renaissance, giving about a 50-minute lecture on that topic in Western Europe and Western civilization. Um, I wanted to, I think, given some of the difficulties with the material, accessing the material on Blackboard, what I plan to do is to, instead of have 75-minute lectures, have three 50-minute lectures instead, and break those maybe into a part one, part two, so it's about 25 minutes a piece. Um, I'll try and stick to that timeline. Hopefully, it'll lead to better um, uploads, and it'll just be all around more accessible. I do appreciate all of you reaching out to me to let me know about the problems. You know, Charlotte, Cora, Joyce, Travis, thanks so much. If anybody does continue to have experienced any problems, hopefully I've addressed them. I'm a little bit at the mercy of YouTube and the accessing the videos. So bear with me as I try and figure that out. So um, for this week coming up, week two, I'll be talking about the Renaissance course, the Reformation in Europe. Those are kind of two key cornerstone events that are going to help us understand the Europe's ascendance basically onto the world history, and also it kind of serves as a cornerstone for the West's understanding of history. You'll get a little bit a preview of that today, talking about the Renaissance. And then I want to take another lecture, and for the week, the third of the three that I'm proposing to talk about continued developments outside the West. So, and give you a sense of political, but also kind of philosophical developments, and a sense of identity, hopefully within those particular societies and cultures. So with that, let me get to this first part here on the Renaissance. Again, this is going to be kind of a boiled down overview of the Renaissance. A lot of information to cover. So as far in a global context, so I can't really drill down too deeply, but on particular topics like this. But hopefully this will do it justice. I'll also be incorporating some material, or referencing, I should say, the YouTube content as well, assigned for this week when and where possible, so that hopefully you can begin to pick up these different threads from these different sources, and begin to see how they're related, or tie into each other to build these broader themes that we'll be looking at. So where we left off, we were talking about the hardships experienced in the um, 14th and 15th centuries, specifically relating to Europe itself, primarily the bubonic plague, the Black Death, and the Hundred Years' War. And we left off talking about how these two events would really serve to um, set the West, set Europe up for its emergence onto the world stage. And at the moment that happens, you have this key event, the Renaissance, occurring. Now, Renaissance really means rebirth, so that you have a flourishing of European culture and its varied expressions across the continent. It was a time of kind of a cultural reconnection with the past, but also it brought in it had that one avenue but then it intersected also with the incorporation of new technologies and also new interactions with the outside world, new powers that were beginning to emerge, primarily the significance of the Ottoman Empire to the southeast in the Mediterranean world. So this really is going to convey a sense, hopefully, of modernity. There's going to be tremendous growth in the arts, um, both written as well as creative arts, the humanities, specifically in literature, history, and also in the sciences, math, astronomy, and also by the end of once the Renaissance had really begun to mature, with kind of the second generation of scientists beginning to emerge in the 17th century, the likes of Galileo Galilei and also Sir Isaac Newton. You have these key figures beginning to formally establish and really practice the scientific method and develop the kind of key characteristics of what exactly the field of science was going to look like, that we still really continue to this day. So this is how we conceptualize, in many respects, the modern world. I talked about how there's going to be the numerous factors that were playing into this ascent to modernity, but and this gravitation towards the more secular elements of European society. Again, think back to the Hundred Years' War and how nationalism really kind of begins to flourish, or actually kind of grow in its importance here. Also, combined with that, the Black Death, where you have greater dependence on technology, and also social mobility coming to the fore. There's another key concept, and that is the fall of Constantinople itself. So here we are picking up where what was a culminating event for the Ottoman identity and its kind of emergence as a serious major power in the world, and especially in the Mediterranean world. It is also going to help trigger this Renaissance effect in Italy and other parts of Europe. Reason for that is because there are going to be those that manage to get out, or flee from Constantinople prior to Mehmet's the second's siege. They're going to move and flee to Rome, and they're going to take their knowledge, their any property they might have, as far as histories, texts, any knowledge, culture, and basically transplant it into Western Europe. So that's going to be a kind of a major short-term effect as to the onset of the Renaissance. Remember that Mehmet II called for a holy war against the Byzantines, and by the end of his reign in 1481, he is going to have established a really dominant, thriving empire that's going to rival European powers, and also kind of begin to rival newly emerging European powers like the Habsburgs and the Muscovites up in what is today Russia. Peeking ahead by 1529, the Ottomans are also going to begin, I believe it's the first of two sieges of the city of Vienna, the capital of Austria today. And this is basically how far they manage to get, how far they penetrate into the interior of Europe, which is pretty considerable. That they had subdued what is today Serbia, much of what had been Yugoslavia before it broke up into its constituent states. Bulgaria was under the uh, domain of the Ottomans. Greece, what is today Greece as well, it was too. But also, I mean, just the interaction of Europeans with this power. Uh, you couldn't deny the influence that the Ottomans had, and so therefore there were going to be official state interactions with the Ottomans, and with that comes the exchange of uh, ideas, of technology, of more kind of modern concepts. And this is why you have in Niall Ferguson's Ascent of Money documentary, in episode 1, he talks about how fundamental the incorporation of Arabic numerals was to the establishment of modern banking principles, which is going to help uh, catapult the affluence and the wealth that's going to come with the Renaissance itself, and help actually uh, facilitate it and perpetuate it. So, because banking, the use of uh, Arabic numerals in banking, which we still use today, I think the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in a number line, those are Arabic numerals. And it makes for so much greater ease in record keeping and accounting, and keeping track of funds, debts, so on and so forth. That's a we kind of take it for granted, but it's a key piece of evidence that shows the relationship or the interaction between virtually East and West, between Arab states and Western Europe, and how integral that piece is. Before that, Europeans were still relying upon Roman numerals. So it's so much more efficient to incorporate Arabic numerals. There's also kind of a slow development that's taking place here as well. That nothing is really a light switch. That this is going to be. There are kind of short-term, immediate triggers that help propel and facilitate something like a major event like the Renaissance. But there are also key, more subtle, nuanced, perhaps long-term effects that were already in motion in Europe, that help to understand the kind of more evolutionary type of onset of something like the Renaissance, and that can be seen as early literary figures begin to incorporate or develop their own styles. People like Dante Alighieri, who lived in the late 13th, early 14th century. Geoffrey Chaucer is another English literary figure, writing the Canterbury Tales. He lived from the 14th into the 15th century, or to the year 1400. So I guess that would be technically the last year of the 13th century. Um, but their attention to the subject matter of their writing was focused more on everyday figures in life, or in the case of Dante Alighieri, to focus on human emotion. In his Divine Comedy, perhaps his best known work, he uses the human concept of love, as the quality the human trait that is going to lead to truth and salvation, which is putting the emphasis not on some spiritual figure, not on a saint or any savior or messiah-like figure, but actually is a quality, a human quality that comes from within. That was not the norm, or was going to establish a new norm in European um, notions of philosophy and salvation. Geoffrey Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, is going to look at more kind of common, a cross section actually, of common, ordinary, everyday, run of the mill people and their interactions as they make their way on pilgrimage across the countryside. So, from this, notions of what are called humanism begin to come to the forefront. Poets and other literary figures, as just mentioned, begin to put human beings, the human condition, at the center of study. So, people's emotions, philosophical questions, what is the essential understanding of what it means to be human? That is going to be the driving kind of question of not only these early examples, but also kind of something that's going to be addressed time and time and time again throughout the Renaissance period. It is also going to reflect in many ways the roots going all the way back to Aristotelian logic. So, if you recall the study of Aristotle in ancient Greece, that understanding, an individual having an understanding of place in the universe was key to developing an individual's full potential in the eyes of Aristotle. Well, in order to do that, people came to realize in the Renaissance that they needed to study what are called the humanities, history, literature, art, to recreate the human form as accurately as possible, to record history and to study history in order to get a full sense of the human experience, and also to convey that in literary form that would be, easy to trace and study. So this required, in many respects, a return to understanding where we came from, and the study of classical literature all the way back to antiquity. And with the arrival of works surviving from Constantinople, this meant that there were works readily available that could begin to be copied and translated and spread or disseminated across much, or if not all, of European society. That's known as the pursuit of antiquarianism. Okay? That you focus on studying the guiding principles laid down in antiquity. And so it's this reconnection, this process of reconnection in the 15th century that really is going to help ignite that Renaissance fervor. You combine that with technologies coming out of things like the Black Death, in particular. And I don't believe I mentioned this last week, but in the 1440s, you begin to have Johannes Gutenberg designing and refining and mass producing or reproducing his invention of the printing press with movable type. So this was something that made the printing of written material more efficient and more rapid. When that happens, you can begin to reproduce products at a greater rate, which means that you are able to lower the printing costs of published material. so that it becomes more accessible because it's cheaper. It also helps, as from last lecture when we talked about um, the greater use of the vernacular languages as opposed to Latin when it came to education, because the Black Death was running roughshod throughout the countryside. Well, when you make materials cheaper and you make materials in a language that more and more people can understand as long as they're literate, then this means that it is going to spread, ideas are going to spread more rapidly throughout a wider swath of society. In art, you're going to see that there's a interesting dual role that's beginning to be played. We're going to look specifically at just two figures, although there are many, but we'll look at two kind of in detail: Leonardo da Vinci and also Michelangelo Buonarroti, and how they combine this very intense investigation of the human form and the human body, but they use it for in religious context and for the glorification of God. That humanity is the again the subject matter of art, but that it is still kind of in a religious setting. They wanted to replicate the kind of more original, authentic form as found in nature, and believed that doing so captured the essence of the divine. So if you are able to use and master concepts like perspective, shading, proper tones of light and dark, color spectrums, and also proportions, this would give a much more realistic three-dimensional effect, as opposed to more kind of early Middle Age, Dark Age type of art, which was not to scale. It was on one plane. It was still it was still art, but it was not necessarily replicating or trying to recreate nature in its idealized state, in its authentic state. Leonardo da Vinci is one of these key figures. He is born roughly in the mid 15th century, 1452. He is the epitome of a Renaissance man. In effect, he is the embodiment of coining that term. He is going to make richly detailed studies of the human skeleton, muscle tissue. So he's dissecting human bodies to understand their structure. He is going to create sketches like the Vitruvian Man in 1492 in order to understand human anatomy, which is again just a sketch. He is going to create massive pieces of artwork, such as the Last Supper, kind of a larger canvas, if you will. So it's a religious piece of art. It's focused on a religious subject matter. But if you look at it, what he's really doing is that he is showing human emotion at the very moment to the news that Jesus shared at the Last Supper itself. So there is a tremendous focus and emphasis on body language, that people are, in some cases don't know what to make or are very upset by the news that he has to share. He was also, I'm talking about Leonardo da Vinci, he was a creative genius. This is what made him such the quintessential Renaissance figure. He lived an eclectic life. He studied not only human biology and anatomy, but he also studied engineering, botany. So he was constantly mesmerized by. He was an inventor of siege equipment, you know, flying machines, or trying to um, study and see if human flight was capable. So he came up with these kind of wild prototypes, that we would kind of consider today. But nonetheless, he is going to uh, devote a tremendous amount of his life, or hours and hours of study, to just trying to make sense of the world and nature that surrounded him. The second key figure that we're going to briefly discuss is Michelangelo. Michelangelo was a sculptor, an artist. One of his best known works is the marble statue of David. This 18-foot tall replica or um, study in this biblical figure, David against Goliath. It is detailed. His sculpture is detailed to the point of veins. So again, a meticulous study of the human form and anatomy. You'll also notice when you take a look at, when you Google, Michelangelo's David, and it should be on one of the slides I'll post, one of the PowerPoint slides, but you see a very kind of human expression. Again, the focus is on the human form, not so much the religious kind of context of David, but more of his human qualities. He takes a more human stance in that Michelangelo creates the illusion of shifted body weight to one side, kind of very human stance, as opposed to a very kind of rigid type of almost unnatural stance of previous sculptures. And the main reason for that is because the material that previous sculptors worked with, pre-Renaissance sculptors worked with, they didn't have the understanding of how to form or make a human form, replicate it in any other way without destroying the material that they were working with. Again, people like Michelangelo make exquisite pieces of art because they do have that ability. And it really conveys a sense of the quintessence of man, of humanity, that David looks both vulnerable yet confident. That he's vulnerable in that he recreates this nude representation of David, but if you look at David's facial expression, the statue's facial expression, it looks very kind of relaxed. It looks very confident in its self-actualized kind of existence. Art itself becomes more widely appreciated during this period of time. Works art, carvings, sculptures became commissioned by a growing affluent class across Europe, particularly in connection with commercial regions. Think specifically Italy, the Italian peninsula, the highly competitive city-states that were beginning to emerge, such as Florence, Venice, um, and others. But also in other places of Europe, like far to the north in the Low Countries, what is today the Netherlands, where there was a very thriving commercial merchant class. So this means that people are able to commission work, commission for sitting for self-portraits or commemorating key events in daily life that reflect the lives beyond the nobility. You know, merchants weren't necessarily nobles; they were, just more affluent commoners, perhaps. And so, one of the best examples, preserved examples, is that of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Very much, not much is known about the Mona Lisa because she wasn't a very uh, uh, distinguished figure in um, when in her contemporary life, and yet it's one again such a treasured piece because of how Da Vinci handles the subject matter, the way he structures the uh, sitting and the setting of this portrait, and so it tells us so much about early Renaissance life and the early Renaissance period, and exactly who and what was being recorded and how. So I want to pause there. And when I come back, I'll talk about kind of other developments that are taking place as well. So let me get that squared away here.